Greg LeMond, welcome back to the Roadman Podcast.
Thank you, Anthony. Nice to be back.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. Minnesota right now with my son and his daughter and my other son and his wife and two grandsons. I got three grandchildren visiting Minnesota.
So, last time we chatted, I was looking at the statistics just before the show. Over 1 million people tuned into our conversation last time, which is pretty wild.
That's crazy.
So I had a chance to scroll back through the comments because there's thousands of comments on some of the stuff. And I scrolled back through the comments and one comment just stuck out to me over and over again. And it's, Greg's the reason I started cycling. How cool is that?
That is pretty cool. That is a good thing. I'm getting very old, but I meet people that were, smokers or a drug addict or alcoholic in the 80s. And then they saw the Tour de France and got them inspired to get on and they're still bike riding. I think that's the kind of coolest thing about any athlete that's out there gets somebody inspired to, get active. And I think cycling is kind of a really good addictive sport. And it's a lifelong sport, but I love it. It's exciting. Even for years, I've just had people come up and, they're the ones, somebody just mentioned this, just this last week. Oh, you don't realize, because I wasn't here in the US when I won the 89 Tour. Yeah. I have no clue. I was so used to, I was looking at a Sports Illustrated article that I did, and that's the number one sports magazine in the US for years. But I'd spent 3 trips with them doing, a feature article. And only one of those got published, but we liked it because a guy named Graham Finland's an English photographer, and E.M. Swift was a writer. But we go to Switzerland this one. We didn't have a whole lot of money, but they'd take care of all expenses. So we had 2 weeks in beautiful hotel and food, but then you think it's going to get published and it doesn't get published. So I'm kind of used to, at that time, never really expecting much coverage in the United States. And then you find out people go, I remember that where I was at when I heard you won. So that's really cool.
It's such a butterfly effect as well, because my dad was obsessed with the interview that we done as well, because he was a huge cycling fan, especially through the late 80s and early 90s. And he wouldn't have started cycling, he said, if it wasn't for you as well. So if he wouldn't have started cycling, that means I wouldn't have got into cycling. This podcast actually wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for you, which is such a weird butterfly effect.
That is true. I never thought of that. That's the way sports are. I think that what was unique though, and for America was that it may be for Ireland because English language, but you got Sean Kelly and Stephen Roche. So, but I think, I don't know what year he watched it. I do understand like in 89, where, people like comebacks, and that was a shock. I think I watch a movie and who doesn't like a comeback? And so that gets people inspired. But I think for me, it was kind of exciting because it really was a sport that was unknown in the United States. And then to kind of make an impact and get people into cycling. And, it's unfortunately like in this country, that in Ireland with Stephen Roche and Sean Kelly, when they were at their top, my God, we did the Tour of Ireland or Nissan Classic, and the crowds were like the Tour de France. And so sadly, it ebbs and flows in countries like Ireland and in the US for popularity. It depends on who's racing well, and who's kind of inspiring people. I find today, it's like in cycling, you got to be a top, Tour de France winner, but there's so many sports or so much stuff on social media, and there's so many things like that have taken people's interest in so many different ways. So I don't know. The Tour de France still is a huge impact in the world of sports. But I think there was a narrow choice in the 80s, let's just say.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation quite recently on the podcast, and it was about the kind of death of the US cycling scene, because when you were at the height of your power, like this is like post 89, when you had that fame, we had this huge knock-on effect in the US as well. And the guy I was chatting to, maybe you even know his name, he was a domestic pro in the US, Jamie Palanetti, and he won a lot of races in the US on the domestic scene for a long time. But he went on to become a filmmaker, and he's now making a film about the rise and fall of American cycling and trying to trace this, because you have those glory days like the Tour de Pont where, you know, for anyone that hasn't seen that footage from those races, it's like being in the cobbled classics. Like the fans are fanatical, they're lining 10 deep. You guys are superstars. And then when I raced over there, I raced for Astellas Oncology in 2013. And that felt a little bit like the last days of the Roman Empire. So he's kind of tracing the rise and fall of American cycling. What do you think happened? What went wrong?
Well, I watched it all the way through my career, and I believe it or not, in the 70s, when I started racing in Northern California, we had more junior racers in the United States than we did 20 years later. And we had then the Redzinger Classic, which became the Coors Classic, but Redzinger Classic was raced in Colorado. It's one of the American Flyers was made off of, and the crowds were like Europe. And but I think it's so expensive to put cycling events in the U.S. It's really expensive, and I think the organizers are always fighting police, getting permitting, and it's very complicated. And unfortunately, I don't think the revenue of the eyes that watch a cycling event, the economics don't make sense. So I do think if you had like the Tour of California, you had a major race in the U.S., that would help the sport. At the same time, I said it kind of ebbs and flows based upon if there's a cycling star. Obviously, when Armstrong started winning, I mean, he got people that would never consider, and, inspired also by his story. And so you saw that rise. But every time I think like, oh my God, it's always in my mind, and I think at least from my perspective, the Tour de France was so important for getting international recognition, even getting recognition from people in the U.S. I keep thinking, oh my God, there's not another generation of racers. And then all of a sudden you go, but there's some really incredible pros right now. The difference is the sport is so focused in Europe. And unfortunately, I don't think even the Tour of California took like an individual wealthy person that decided to put the money into the sport. And, I don't know how to change that. I do think that, like, from a participation perspective, we talk about gravel, but gravel is really a byproduct. It's road riding on gravel. And what's nice, I think the road riding was taking off, after Armstrong's, let's say, success, people got into road riding. But I think, just the traffic and, perceived danger on the road, gravel has really taken that place. So there's a lot of gravel races, but from a national level perspective, where athletes are getting recognized, it's typical. I'm not surprised. I've watched it since I started cycling.
Who do you think, or how long do you think it's going to be before we see another US Tour de France winner?
Oh, it could be soon. I mean, there's some really great riders. But you would think, I just think it's the same about a Tour de France winner. So, look at Belgium. When was the last time a Belgian won the Tour de France? I think it was Eddie Merckx. And so, yep, I think so.
Yeah.
Lucien Van Emp, maybe? Lucien Van Emp after that? Yeah, it was Lucien Van Emp. And that's a cycling country where it's like there's so many races coming out of there. So it's a rare occasion to get an athlete that can win the Tour. But I think we have a crop of young riders that have the potential. At the same time, you have an incredible crop of young riders that are truly at the very top. So it's a very competitive market right now, competitive competition. It just takes one person, but I say it takes just one person. But having that one person is not easy to find.
Yeah, and I think it's almost becoming harder and harder to find, because you look at the sacrifices they're making so early now. So you're having 16, 17-year-olds are behaving like full professionals now, where they're doing altitude camps, they're monitoring their diet. So if that talent isn't found and nurtured at a super early age, their European counterparts are going to have 2, 3, 4 years of that high-level pro training. And I've seen in football 3 years, that's kind of what happened over here, that you need to get the talented 15, 16-year-olds to go to the UK at the age of 15, because if they don't go until they're 18, all of a sudden they're 3 years behind the English counterparts who have that coaching.
I think cycling, if you had the physical ability, I think it's more about racing knowledge and skills. I think football is, there's a lot like tennis, golf. If you're late in there, you're done. But cycling, if you have the talent, you see people coming from mountain biking or running, and they make a good transition. But I think right now, the irony is right now, it's getting back to where it was in the 80s, where 18, 19-year-olds, I know that at 18, I probably could have, if I know the physiology, and I could have won the Tour de France at 18. The physical capabilities there. So, but I had trained, Diemard, or that time my coach there was a a real plan not to even let you enter the tour till you're 23, 24, which I kind of bought into that. But I think you can see right now that's not the case. I mean, physically, you're capable of doing it at 18, 19, 20. It's a lot of me, to me, it's like pro racing is about psychological, being able to race 100 races a year. That's where it kind of builds up that ability to stay at a high level of fitness. That's where you get better each year. But I think if you have talent, I do think the young riders, are getting noticed right away. And if you're 18 or 19, even get started, and you got the real talent, you'll get there really quickly. You might be 23 or 20 when you get taken into Europe. But the thing is, you got to be in Europe to be recognized, and you got to be racing there. And you either have to be on a national team or get on a team. I think it's more about your ability to get on a team is going to be the challenge. Because like you said, they're already recruiting very young riders. So if you're starting a little bit later, I don't know. I don't know if you got the talent, somebody will pick you up.
Yeah, talent papers over a lot of cracks when you have that level of talent. Let me circle right back to the very start, Greg, because last time we talked, and any interview I've heard you in, everybody naturally wants to talk about the highlights. They want to talk about the Tour de France wins, the Worlds wins, the Hunting accident. But I actually haven't heard your origin story. I haven't heard how you got started. And just before the call, I was kind of sitting down with my girlfriend, and she was like, what was your first group ride like? And I was thinking about my first group ride. I went out and I was so embarrassed wearing cycling shorts that I pulled football shorts over them. And I cycled up to the local group ride, and I was using clip-in pedals, but it was my first time using clip-in pedals instead of look pedals. Got to the front of the group ride. I peeled the football shorts off at this point, so I was looking kind of semi like I knew what I was doing. Got to the front of the group ride, and predictably enough, like boom, down I went right in front of everyone. And like to this day, the guys who were on that group ride still take the piss out of me for that first day. Can you remember your very first group ride?
Yeah, I mean, well, my first group ride was a Reno Wheelman club race. So I started riding with my dad the summer before. I started to get in shape for skiing, and I went to a ski camp. And at the time, the popular sport that was growing was hot dog skiing, freestyle skiing, and I lived at Lake Tahoe, Reno, which was I started skiing when I was 8 years old. So that was my passion at the time, and I wanted to learn to do aerials, flips, and all that. That was part of in freestyle skiing, you had mogul skiing, you have ballet and aerials, and so I went to. For my birthday, my parents bought me a week camp at a guy named Wayne Wong, who was like the star at the time in Whistler, Canada. I came back, and I used to work in the summer lifting hay on ranches or mowing lawns. And 4 weeks later, I made enough to buy a Raleigh Grand Prix, and my dad bought one, and we started riding together. But I didn't, it was just, I fell in love with just riding. The irony, when I left to go to this camp in June, we were blocked by a bike race in front of my dad's house, which was the Northern California Nevada State Championships. And it was so interesting that I'd never even seen bike racing before. Then I came back and started riding, and then we were driving into Carson City, and we saw another bike race, and it was the Pan American qualified road race. And it went from Carson City up to Lake Tahoe. I mean, a 4,000 foot climb, back down, and we followed it. And I kind of think back to it, and I'm going, here in that summer, we were exposed to 2 races, but never thought of racing. And 6 months later, I was at a bike shop in Reno looking at equipment. Once I get into summer, I start looking at equipment. And there was no snow that winter, so I wasn't skiing. And a guy named Cliff Young, who was Nevada State champion or something like that, and the Northern California, combined the states, Northern California, Nevada, you competed with each other. And he asked me if I had ever thought of racing, and I hadn't. And he invited me to a Reno Wheelman club meeting, and then, sat there listening. I kind of look at myself now going, like, I'm a hermit now. I mean, I'm going, I can't believe I actually went there. Then they suggested I do this club race, which is on the state championship course, which was in front of my parents' house. We had about 40 riders, but there were a national champion in there. There were national level riders in there. And I showed up just like you, but I didn't have lycra. I had running shorts, a tank top at that time, and tennis shoes. And it had to be about 40 degrees out. It was winter. It was February. And that's we have snow. And I ended up getting second place and an uphill finish. And, I just remember just riding as hard as I could. And everybody stopped, after it came up to my dad and said, "Oh my gosh, I think your son has some talent. You should go get there's a race in 2 weeks, but he'll need a bike that fits him and a racing bike." And we ended up going back to that shop, and they had one bike in that shop that was a racing bike, an Italian bike, Cinelli, a yellow Cinelli. And so I bought a matching yellow jersey. Was there with the bike. Yeah. And so, but 2 weeks later, I showed up my race, and I just, I had the first event was kind of small. When I had 15 competitors, it was nothing. But my dad started racing too in the category 3 and 4. There had to be about 200 to 300 riders in his category. And I won it. And then I watched my dad, and he's a criterium in the park, and I could just see crash after crash after crash. My dad rode, on the outside of the peloton the whole time. But the next day was the first, I'd say, bigger race. And there's, 60 intermediate, 40, 50 intermediates. That's 13 to 15 years old. But I got to the start line, and I'm, of course, in my yellow jersey and yellow bike. And I see some guy looking at me, with disgust. I'm going, "Oh God, why does he hate me? I don't even know him." It's my second race. And anyways, he attacked, I followed, and I ended up winning the race. And then I won my first 11 races. On my 12th race, a guy named Kent Gordis, who actually helped write my first book called The Complete Book of Cycling in 1985. Kent Gordis beat me in this 5-mile race. Literally, it's 6 laps. But he got a 2 bike length jump on me. And anyway, I went and congratulated him, and we started talking. And he told me, got to take that jersey off. And I go, "What do you mean?" He said, "Nobody wears a yellow jersey except if you're leading the Tour de France or winning the Tour de France." And I said, I don't even know what that event is. What is it? So I changed my jersey. And so, I think what was really interesting for me in racing was I never thought of competition. I didn't think of racing. Even in skiing, I didn't follow. Our family didn't follow sports that much, really. My mom was an Olympic fan, but freestyle, I was really an outdoor. Moving Los Angeles to Lake Tahoe when I was 8, I discovered Sierra Nevadas, and I was into fishing. I got into hiking, fishing, fly fishing, and so I was in skiing. And so when I got into bike racing, it was my first time, racing a bike. Bike racing to me is still the best of car racing and say running. And but what's crazy is I won prizes. I think my weekend I came away with $200-300 worth of prizes. You're going. My sister was a national level gymnast. She was on the national team. She really was a super talented gymnast. She toured in Russia. She competed at the time. It was an official authorized trip to South Africa, kind of an exhibition of gymnastics, and injured her back after her goal was the 1980 Olympics. Injured her back after the 76 Olympics. But if she, as a national, let's say a national level gymnast, national team level, if you got a pair of sneakers, you'd be banned from the Olympics forever. And here in cycling, I think I was thinking about it when I was 18 years old, still a junior. No, I just turned amateur. I made $30,000 in cash. My son said that's equal of almost $120,000 today.
But your talent was so raw then. One of the comments that I thought was really nice that we got in about that period was someone sent a message in, said they were at the 1979 Nevada City Classic. I'm not sure if you remember this race, but you were still a junior. And apparently that day you won both the junior and the senior race. And then you came back the following year and you lapped the entire field. What sort of training were you doing as a junior to be able to stick it up to the Cat 1s like that? How much was nature versus nurture?
Nature. Nature. It's genetics. I think it's genetics, but I grew up in a really great area for bike riding. But I won my first 12 races. And then, but I think what's interesting for me, and I think maybe, I don't know, might explain maybe my not capitulating to doping. Some people might. Winning wasn't my real, I loved winning. But if I think back to I was 14 years old and I won my first 11 races, And I asked permission from the governing, officials if I could get permission to race with the junior category, which was 15 to 18. And I was the first rider ever to get permission for that. But juniors had a 53, 15, 53 chain ring, 15 in the back. And the intermediate had a 47 or 45, 15. I can't remember. It's 45, 15, much smaller gear. But I never won another race that year. But I was so excited. I was second in Nevada City that year. My highlight of that year was we did a mountain type, was like a point A to point B up Mount Tamalpais, which is Marin County famous. That's where mountain biking started, but it's a 2,600 foot climb. And George Mount, who was sixth in the Olympics that year, we broke away and he couldn't drop me. And if I would have had the junior gears, I think I would have won it because it was not on the hill finish. But that was the highlight. I mean, it was really like, oh my gosh, that was a huge, for me, an athletic achievement because I was just 15 years old and he was sixth in the Olympics, world-class racer. So that was kind of a sign. Then the following year was my first year junior. And again, I won most every race I entered. I don't know if I got permission that year to race with the senior Olympic level, but I know that year I was racing in a race with John Howard at that time. And John Howard's a stage race, 3-day stage race in Fresno. And I broke away with him and we were minutes in front of everybody. And this guy was he really was one of the top. I mean, I think if he was racing in the 80s, 90s, he would have been a really good pro. But he was, I don't know how many times national champ, Pan American champion, 3-time been on the Olympics. But in the time trial, I was 20 seconds up on him, but I turned around. It was like a 30-mile-an-hour tailwind. I spun out and he beat me by 10 seconds. But that was my first year. And the following year, I asked permission to go to the amateur Olympic. I called it amateur. That was after 18 years old older. That would be the top category in the U.S. But I won most of my races there. But I think it was interesting for me when I started racing, it was all these, Northern California especially really was into the traditional road racing. They knew all the European racers but there was this kind of mystique about the European races. Eddie Merckx was at its prime or just coming at the end of it, and Freddie Martins and all these great classic riders. And, I started looking at all the magazines, Miroir de Cyclisme, and it's just sparked an imagination. But at the time, I just know that it was like, man, nobody, it'd be a dream to even think about competing against them. Now, there were a few riders, a guy named Mike Neal, who was quite a good rider. He did well, 10th place in the World Championships. And he was an early pioneer. And he went to Europe and got turned pro with an Italian team. And George Mount, again, he was a really early, really good racer that was sixth in the Olympics. He went and turned a couple years later before I turned pro with an Italian team. But
so
it
how
still
do you make
was
that jump, though? You're saying with the Italian team, like how do you? Because it's a long way still. Like,
I didn't go to Italian. I didn't go to the Italian team. I'm saying George Mount.
Oh, okay, sorry. So
Mike
how did you
Neal,
make your jump to Europe?
Well, I'm still a junior, so I'm just talking about my junior period. So I started 14 and a half, and so I've got 3 years as a junior. And at that time, there were some early pioneers, Mike Neal and George Mount.
Okay.
But I'm saying the mentality in America is that Americans could never compete in Europe. Now, the guy that I lined up in 1976 in Tassajara Road Race was the guy that looked at me with disgust, Kent Gordis. We became really great friends. And his dad lived in Switzerland. His mom lived in Berkeley, but Kent was, I don't know, he graduated from Yale at 16. He spoke Russian, French fluently, probably German and English, of course. And he still is like the historian. He knows everything about cycling, every statistic. I mean, he educated me on, so much about Europe. But in 1978, I did the world champ. Well, actually, this is nobody, and I kind of forget this race, but the Junior World Championships were in Washington, D.C. in 1978, which was a big deal. Nobody had a World Championships. And my first coach was a guy named Eddie Borisevich. He defected after 76 Olympics. He ended up becoming the national coach. And his focus on junior racers, he felt like that's where you develop the talent. and our focus was on team time trial training. And he was the first guy. I mean, if I think back, he implemented real interval training for juniors. I mean, I knew, Eastern Bloc type of training methods at 16, 17 years old. We ended up getting a bronze medal in the team time trial behind East Germans, and I forgot, they won it, Roche second. And I got ninth place in the road race. And that was kind of like, a big deal for me. And I did it on a broken saddle. So that was my first international competition. And it's like, okay. But Eddie B, the coach, he gave us really, he believed that we were world class. He called me a diamond in the rough. You're like a rare diamond, but needs to be polished. But that summer, just after the World Championships, I flew to Europe with Kent Gordis, and he took his mom and his brother and Kent and we stayed at his dad's place in Switzerland for July, but he drove me to a race outside of Zurich, and then one near Crans-Montana, which had all the best Swiss riders, and I won both those races. And then I raced 2 races in France, one near Annecy, one near Chambéry-Chalizoux, and I won both those races. And then, and then because Belgium was the place to go, that was the school of cycling, and Kent Gordis, and even at that time, I knew about Belgium. We went up there for 3 weeks, and I entered 6 or 8 races. I think I won all 6 or 8 races. So every race I entered, I won. And I'm racing not in America, I'm racing in Europe with the best people. And Eddie Merckx, this is where my logic started coming in. I'm going, okay, these guys are gods and they're so talented, we don't have the ability to compete. Well, all these great riders have to start as a junior. Eddie Merckx had to start off a junior. And if I'm as good as anybody in Europe at this time, why can't I think about the Tour de France? And it was that trip that I first saw the Tour de France, a stage up the Jouplan into Morzine. And that was like, oh my God, that was the most amazing thing to see. And at the end of my 2-month trip, Eddie Borusevich, his nickname was Eddie B, his abbreviated with a B instead of, nobody could pronounce his last name. He had arranged for me and another American rider to fly to Poland and do an international stage race. It's a 3-day race in southern Poland. There was Czechoslovakia, and at the time, Eastern Bloc countries, East Germans. So I had a little piece of paper in a pencil with an address on it and a name. And the friend that was supposed to go, the other rider that was supposed to go, ended up going home to the U.S. I didn't know that, and I showed up at the airport in Brussels myself, and I flew to Warsaw, and I had $75 on me. I had a bike and 4 sets of wheels and a suitcase. And, at that time, there's no phones. And I flew over to Warsaw, landed there, and, walk out expecting somebody to pick me up. And I sit there and nobody's picking me up. An hour goes by, 2 hours go by, 3 hours go by, nobody's there. And I'm going, what do I do? I got a fixed ticket, leaves in a week. And I didn't think if I could just go change it. I probably could have, but I didn't have a credit card or anything. So I'm sitting there, and I finally, I still remember going to buy Coca-Cola, and, I felt like a fish out of water, but I walk and it breaks and the whole airport stops and stares at me. I probably was a little more self-conscious. So I went out to the taxi cab drivers, and I told them this is Łódź, just a town that the address of Łódź, WZ, and they asked for $80 in cash to take me down there. And I said, I don't have it. So I went back in, I came back, and I negotiated a guy for $25, and he took me down. But that was like an hour and a half, 2-hour drive. And then we spent an hour and a half driving around Łódź to find the address. And then we finally got to the address, and I knock on the door, and I look, this woman answered. I go, Greg LeMond, Eddie B. And she goes like, I don't understand anything. And I said, Eddie Borusevich. Okay. But she wouldn't call her husband, who was the national track coach. They called Eddie B, and Eddie B forgot to call him. So I completely forgot I was there. And so anyway, I ended up spending a week there, and it was really incredible to be in Eastern Europe. At the time, I ate like they treated me like royalty. But I remember going to purchase bread with the wife to meet, and it was really like you read about. It was like an hour in the bread line, an hour in the meat line, And anyways, I went down into this race in southern Poland. I'd say the accommodations were horrendous. And one thing I'd never really grew up liking, I could drink milk with cereal, but just plain milk. And the breakfast was warm milk and noodles. And I could not eat it. So I went 3 days with no breakfast. But anyways, I won the first stage. I ended up taking the lead, then I crashed, and I ended up, I think, getting third place overall. But I came back from that trip going, okay, I was very goal-oriented. I've always been, and I'm going, okay, I think I have the talent to go to the Tour de France. And I went home and I wrote 4 goals out on a piece of paper. I was 9th in the road race, and I felt like I was as good as anybody. And so my objective the following year was World Championships, Junior World Championships, Olympic Championships in 1980. And then I was kind of modeling my career after Eddie Merckx and Bernard Hinault, look at their time frame of their development. And I added a year because I'm an American. So instead of World Championship 21, like Merckx did, I said 22. Instead of a Tour de France at 24, I put it 25. And that was my goal. And I got every one of those except the Olympics, which is a boycott. But I knew pretty quickly but I think it was a 1978 trip for certain that was my third year of racing that I knew that I had world-class talent. And the following year at the Junior World Championships, I ended up getting second in the pursuit, another bronze medal, and the team title. And I think I led 50% of the team title, 70 kilometers. And so, and that was, but I think the fun story is, so I was 18 years old, and the World Championships were in October 79. The pro season works, February, you start the south of France races and training camp. And one of the sponsors in 1980 was a guy named Michael Fatke. He owned a bike shop in Ames, Iowa. And he was a Raleigh dealer, but he became friends with Raleigh professionals, Gary Knetman, I think a little bit Jan Ross, but his real friend was Gary Knetman, who was a really top racer in the 70s. And he arranged for me we flew over into Belgium in, I think, January of 1980. And he was trying to get me on a pro team with Peter Post and Raleigh. And so we flew, and Gary Knetman invited us to the Maastricht, 6 days of Rotterdam. So we go over there, and then, I think the next day we were meeting Peter Post at the team presentation in Maastricht. And so I'm waiting, they're all nervous, and, met Gary Knetman, and, I flew all the way this way to, I think Michael Fatke was trying to pitch me to get on this pro team. And Peter Post came in, very tall guy, very, confident, blue eyes, looks like a very successful businessman. Oh, kid, nice to meet you. You have me a car. Call me in a couple of years. That's what he said. And I'm like, wow, I did this whole trip over here, and that's it. And anyways, that was January. And then in April, I came over with the national team preparing for the Olympics. And at that time, there were 2 programs. One team went to Italy to race amateur races, Settimana Bergamasca. I forgot all these races. And then I went to the French program, which we raced a race called Circuit des Ardennes, which I just talked to Stephen Roche yesterday, 2 days ago. And he said, do you remember when we first met? I said, yeah, it's Circuit des Ardennes. Because he remembers a different day, but we were riding up a climb, and he was, high cadence, and we were pushing each other, trying to get in position. Then he remembered another deal where I was probably fighting with him again for position, and I was, I guess, very aggressive with him. He grabbed my handlebar and said, you do that again, I'm taking you down. So anyways, and I was at that race. I won a stage in this. We landed the day before. I'm so jet lagged, but I won a stage there. I think it was third overall. And then we drove from Circuit des Ardennes to Circuit de la Sarthe, which at that time, there were 2 Pro-Am races. You had Tour de l'Avenir, which was the small Tour de France, where you had, I said it just for people that are new to the sport now, up until 96, there were 2 categories of, let's say, over 18. There was a professional level, which is the Tour de France, and then the amateur level, which is the Olympics. Olympics were always a stepping stone in cycling. Cycling, it was always the the Tour and pro racing. But at that time, the Russians are very good Eastern European racers. Sergei Sukharov-Kenchov, pronunciation not my best deal. But these guys were really great pros. And so the 2 times they were able to compete was Circuit de la Sarthe in April of 1980, and then Tour de l'Avenir, which would be in September. And I was 18 years old, and I think Olaf Lug was there. I don't think the Russians were there, but all the best riders, and I think 2 or 3, I think second or third place rider in the Tour de France was there. Anyways, I ended up winning that stage race. And there was another stage race a week later called Ruben Grandier Breton. And I already knew about who Guimard was because he came to a Circuit de la Sarthe. He was following Marc Madio. Anyways, and he ended up following the last stage, and I was in a break with the Russians. We were 5 minutes up, and I had a flat tire, and we were sponsored by a French bike company called Lejeune, and the guy ended up having to get gas while we were in the breakaway, and I had no wheel change, and I ended up losing a minute or two. The Belgians gave me a wheel change, and I realized I'm 2 or 3 minutes down. I'll never catch up, and I was so pissed at the mechanic, and he kept smiling. He said, "Oh, keep going. You'll get 5th place." And I said, "5th place?" And he said, "You got to do this for your sponsor." I said, "Do it for my sponsor. You screwed me." And I got off my bike and threw it at him in the car, and I said, "Screw you." And I got in the car and went back to the finish line. And Guimard approached me after that stage and said he'd like to propose, a contract with me for 1981. So that was my dream. And I knew Guimard was the very best team, and I still smile about it because Peugeot was bidding for me, and Guimard offered me 6,000 French francs, which was $1,000 a month, and Peugeot has offered me 20,000, but like 3 times as much. But I chose Guimard's team, and then Guimard told me, "Oh, but you were the highest rider we've ever paid." I found out that was totally bullshit too.
You told that to everyone.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward a little bit. Last time we chatted, we kind of went deep on the 1989 Tour de France, which if anyone hasn't listened to it, go back and listen to that. Also, your documentary has come out since then, The Last Race, which is absolutely brilliant. So if anyone hasn't seen that,
yeah, the Last Rider
on Apple. Last Rider, sorry. I checked it out on Apple, and so it's up there, and it's great job on that. That was brilliant.
Yeah. I can't ever comment on anything that I'm in it. So I think people liked it. It was more about my wife and our family and kind of some of the struggles up to 89.
Hey Roadmen, today's episode is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, Lacoste. I bounced around cycling clothing brands for many years, that is until I found Lacoste. Lacoste is raising the bar in cycling clothing. It was founded by former Team GB cyclist Yanto Barker, and Lacoste isn't just another cycling brand. It's an apparel brand which is born out of professional racing's heart and soul. Yanto's mission was clear: to create the ultimate cycling gear, combining pro-level insights with the kind of technical details that make all the difference when you're in the elements. Whether you're racing, training, or you're just enjoying the ride, I've got to say, Lacoste have absolutely nailed it. Every piece of Lacoste gear, it's tested to the limit, ensuring it stands up to the rigours of even the toughest rides. What really sets Lacoste apart from my mind is how they've taken the feedback from professional riders, from sponsoring World Tour teams, and worked with top aerodynamicists. So whether you're pushing to beat your own personal best on a local KOM, or you're just out enjoying the open road, Lacoste's mission is to help you get the most out of every single ride. Trust me, feeling good on the bike means performing well, and with Lacoste, you're always in good hands. They've got some amazing sales going on at the moment. If you head over to www.lacoste.cc, you can go and check them all out.
Great story. Highly recommend it. But let's jump into 1990 because you're going into the race as world champion. Did the Course of the Rainbow Jersey, did that exist back then?
The what?
The Course of the Rainbow Jersey, yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. And that was, I had my philosophy at that time because I won the world championships when I was 22. And, up until then, you're just a racer. And I got the benefit of not being a Tour de France winner. I think that's the pressure that comes with the Tour de France or, becoming a star is the press, the demands on your time. And I remember 1983, I just got inundated with demands. I didn't know how to say no. And, I just kind of got burned out a little bit after the Worlds just from the demands. And that meant I was a little fatigued for training. And I didn't enter the season like I normally would. I mean, just slightly up, but sometimes you start slightly up. You're chasing it, conditioning, and it eventually catches up. But in 1989 to 1990, I won the Worlds. And I guess I would say I had the curse because the crazy thing is I signed what they call a world, at the time, the highest paid rider at the time. I signed for $2 million a year over 3 years. That's $6 million, a lot of money. I smile because I think Stephen Roche probably doesn't know this, but I think he's the one who really caused the rise in salaries, because when I turned pro from Renault to La Vie Claire with Bernard Tapie, he announced I got $1 million contract. Well, he didn't say it was over 3 years. So that's $333,000. I don't know if this is true, because I just heard that when Roche won it, the tour, he, I think, assumed that I was making $1 million. I think he demanded $1 million. I think he got paid that. And so that's kind of the rise of the salary. So when I won in 1989, it was interesting because this is more money I ever dreamed of. And I had Toshiba, who was my old team. They offered, I think, 3 or 4, but I can't remember, way more than teams, they called Team Z. But they're the ones who also let me go after I got shot. And I'm like, I'll never go back to those people. But anyways, I signed my contract. And in cycling at the time, it's just like, you never talked about money. And they felt like, God, you're going to make that much money, you're going to lose interest in cycling. You're getting soft. So that winter, of course, I'm so excited about winning the tour. And somehow I got caught Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue. And I started the season just wiped out. And I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I could barely finish a race. And of course, that was the curse of the rainbow jersey. But there was worse than that. It was basically Greg's gotten soft. He doesn't care about racing. He's made so much money. Well, I hadn't made any money at that point because I still had to earn it in that season.
Yeah.
So I came back in April of 1990, and I spent 4 or 5 weeks riding very little. And I ended up getting better by May. I felt better. Sometimes when you have a virus and you're racing, you never take the time to fully recover. You're never letting your immune system kind of get over things. And so I started the Giro d'Italia that year, and I decided I'm going to do a gruppetto the whole time. I was, really decided not going to push myself. And I got done with that race and felt better. Then I got in the Tour of Switzerland, felt even better. But I entered the 1990 Tour where wasn't close to my 89, but definitely not close to my condition in 1991 or in 86. But
strange to say an underdog as the defending champion and also world champion going into the race, but you definitely weren't as hyped. When I was looking at the
they wrote me off. Everybody wrote me off. Yeah.
Which I think adds to the story as this tour develops. But one thing I really noticed in the 1989, the dramatic Champs-Élysées time trial, it's much documented. You used the aero kit. Fignon didn't use a lot of aero kit. Maybe that was the difference. Maybe this, saddle sore and large testicle, whatever it is. But in 1990,
it's not the saddle sore and large testicle. 100%.
Don't think it is?
Not that. No, he did. He was 3rd place in the time trial, and I would say that I told him this. I said, if you had the tri bars, I believe you would have won. I absolutely believe that because
Guimard still thinks it was the enlarged testicle.
He was 3rd place. No doubt that probably impacted him, but I think what impacted him more was Guimard yelling at him that he was falling behind. You could see him panicking and pushing himself to the limit. Just time trials are about push yourself just at your limit, but not going over. But at the same time, you can argue that Guimard and Renault had a better team. I was no teammates. They had a 2 or 3 minute lead just after the team time trial. So you can argue all these when you lose it. And I still remember doing an interview with Fignon. We were in the Briançon at the Tour de France, I think 2009 or something like that. And he kept saying, I lost 12 seconds. This is where I lost it. I lost 12 seconds here. And I said, no, you didn't. You lost it because Guimard didn't believe the triathlon bars. Had you used those, I believe you would have won. And I said, the irony, though, Guimard truly was the leader of aerodynamics. they used the Formula One, Renault Formula One wind tunnel. We had deep dish wheels, just like you see today, that are carbon, but out of aluminum. We had aerodynamic tubes. I would bet that some of the equipment we had back then is equally as fast as a lot of stuff today. If you look at look at the helmets that we used in 1984, go back and we had a much more aerodynamic helmet than I used in 1989. In fact, Guimard, I think it was 84, we showed up, at least there was one bike with a fairing off the back, and it was refused because they added like huge aerodynamic fairing off the back of the seat. So when I kind of smiled when Fignon kept trying to find reasons, I said, the leading aerodynamic person, Guimard, decided you couldn't breathe off of those. Obviously, he had the bars. He had the bars during the tour. So, but that is a part of the beauty of cycling. It's not just, it's about choosing your equipment. Aerodynamic is always important. So is weight to power weight ratio. So is always important. So I kind of look at it, I think it was a great tour because both of us were so close. But I would say that he was probably stronger than me for certain in some of the big stages. But at the same time, I look back and I go, I had no teammates, and you realize that how much energy you waste by yourself. So at the end of the day, it zeroes out. And no matter what, it's who crosses the finish line first that matters.
What was your relationship like with Fignon? Because I remember the day we'll get on to 1990 in a minute, but just to finish on 89, I remember the day you lost yellow in the 1989 tour, and Fignon was mouthing to the press that evening about how you didn't respect the jersey and you didn't ride like a leader. And then later on in the race, he's talking about how on Alpe d'Huez, when you cracked, I feel like the tour is won today, and he's toasting champagne like on the train the day before the TT in Paris, which just to me seems totally not even just bizarre, but disrespectful.
Well, Guimard denies it because I think there was an interview on The Last Rider. I think, Last Rider. He doesn't remember, but I remember. And but that same stage that Fignon was complaining about that I wasn't respecting the jersey. First of all, I got the jersey. Second of all, I had a team that wasn't with me in the mountains. I was by myself. And the third point is I hadn't been in the front of the peloton since 1986. So I was nervous as hell to be in the mountains. And obviously, I was at my limit because it did take 10 seconds out of me. So one thing I know is I race smart tactically. I didn't let my ego get the best of me. And Fignon just had a weird personality. I liked Fignon. But when he did well in races, his head expanded. He became very cocky. And when you get cocky, you lose races. And I think he lost the race because he was overconfident. When he tapped me on the shoulder the day before the final time trial, I said, "Congratulations on your second place." I said, "Right there, you've lost," because I knew that the time trial was very short, and you'd come in there a little cocky, and it'd probably start off slow. And I knew that I had to take time on him the first kilometer. But Fignon, complex character. I mean, I think he had a lot of. Like, I got ripped apart, when I got shot, I got letters saying I deserved it. Shouldn't have been. Now you know what a turkey feels like, and shouldn't have been racing. And then Belgian headquarters, the guy who eats pizza and hamburgers and golf got what he deserved. He shouldn't have been hunting. Well, okay. But I was a very optimistic person, and I never let that stuff get to me. And I think Fignon, after winning 2 tours, he struggled for years. And I think there are probably a lot of negative articles written about him. And he took that anger and put it back at the journalist. And to me, that's sad because even for him to be that impacted for losing, you learn to lose in bike racing. Winning is such a rare occasion relative to the amount of racing you do. So it's always struck me as odd that it devastated him that much because I think psychologically he felt like he was the best rider, let's just say in 83 and 84. But I also look at nobody was there truly to compete against him in 83, 84. I was not great. Was just coming back. But in his mind, he was as good as anybody. And then he suffered through 85 and 86. And then when he came back, I think it was like an ego deal. I'm the best. And he was angry at everybody. And I think it's sad because he held that much anger for so many years. And more tragically, I heard from a good friend of his that after he lost the Tour in '89, he never went back to the Champs-Elysees, and for years would count as he walked 1,001, 1,002, 1,003, 1,004 to 8 seconds. And, I feel bad for him because I would have been happy with the second place that year. I mean, I came from, that's the thing. I don't think Fignon even understood where I came back from either. I mean, he had a tendon injury that took him. I mean, I took him years to get over. I mean, I literally have 50 lead pellets in me still, 2 in my heart, 3 in my liver, and have chronic lead poisoning, and right lung collapsed. And I went from 148 pounds to 118 pounds. And it was all muscle mass I lost. And so I had to come back from there. And I was just happy to be at that tour.
Do you feel a little sad for Fignon that his legacy is largely, even though he won the Tour de France twice, his legacy is the guy who lost the Tour de France by 8 seconds?
Oh, I do. I mean, and I've had good conversations, good times with Fignon afterwards. I mean, I went back in '96, a candy company called Haribo invited us over. We drove a Formula One car, played golf in this event. And I got along with him. I met him a couple other times at the tour, but I have to say, it's like I'd be standing side by side to him, and you see a French guy come up, great, congratulations, and then he'd look at Fignon. How could you lose by 8 seconds? It was awkward, very awkward for me. I mean, I felt bad for him, and but sadly, somebody's going to lose that day. Yeah. It would have been me or him, and I think, that. It's hard to go back and but I think the devastation was the confidence that he wanted. I mean, he already had it. It's like he probably feels robbed because he had felt like he is home free, but he lost
the confidence. Almost felt like insecurity though, looking back on it, looking at those interviews now and knowing how it panned out. They actually don't seem the words of a confident person to me. They seem the words of someone who's very insecure and who's almost trying to play this, poor Muhammad Ali mind games with a competitor.
Oh, I think during the tour, yeah. I think that's Fignon. I think what I've been able to read and understand, he was a very shy person. And so he was very awkward at times. And I think, if you're shy, then all of a sudden you have a lot of confidence from your victories. I think that's why I said, his personality changed. But he did. I mean, he was trying to psychologize. I mean, the verbal battle after the me not leading the tour was a kind of a mind game. That's what I forgot to say, though, is at the end of that stage in Super Bagnères, he was ripping me. And the next morning I said, Laurent, I think it was the Tourmalet or the next climb, I saw you holding onto a motorcycle. And at that time, they put a rule in because there were a lot of people, the gruppetta, we call them, they had their left arm or the right arm was 10 inches longer because you're holding on to cars, and it was an automatic disqualification of the Tour de France. I said, had an official saying, you wouldn't even be sitting here talking to me. And he held on to get him over an earring. And that's something I would never have done. I don't care how bad I was doing. I mean, if I was
especially as a GC rider, like whatever about, we could debate the merits for a gruppetto, but for a GC rider to be holding on, that's like totally unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. And he never criticized me after that. Because I said, you want to play a war game? I mean, word war game. I'll be glad to talk about that. So, I mean, it got, but anyways, it was a fascinating tour because it was, even at that point, I kind of was aware of Fignon's own kind of demons. I was with him on 1984 Tour de France, and I liked Fignon. I liked him. I think we were, even in 84, 83, we were all these young riders. He was a very ambitious rider. I think I don't think he knew how talented he was until he got in the Tour in 83 and 84. And when you taste victory like the Tour, it's hard to go back and go out and race another time Tour de France and not be on the podium. It's very difficult. Yeah. And I think he went from winning 2 tours to not.
So we jump forward to 1990, the time trials in Future Scope. It seems like everybody's using Aero Kit now, but you've even taken that a step further. You've brought this kind of new aerodynamic, It's almost like a bullhorn type design. How did this come about? You're riding a different aero setup than almost everyone else.
Well, because Boone Lennon, who was really people take different claims who invented the tri-bar, but I mean, some people claim it was somebody in the race across America, but it was the handlebar position there was to rest their arms. Boone Lennon was national ski coach for the women's team. He came out of Sun Valley, and he really did the test on the aerodynamics and perfected the position. And after I saw Eraser Davis Finney in the Tour de Trump in 1989, how it improved his position, I reached out to him. I told myself, if I ever race well again, I'm going to find out who invented that. I called him, and that's how I used it in 89. So he did some other tests with a really narrow bar. And of course, the way he was testing it was faster because he did a test where you're riding on a downhill like a time trial. So it was aerodynamic drag test. But what I realized there is I could not pedal. So I ended up doing well on the individual time trial. It was short, but there was a longer time trial, I think a week later, and I got done with it. I felt like I didn't even push myself, but I couldn't. I couldn't pedal properly. It was like wasn't breathing. It was just hindering my whole ability to apply power to the pedal. And so you got to be careful about all these aerodynamic positions. The most important thing, you got to apply power to the pedal. You're forced to the pedal. And in theory, it was good, but I literally adapted that before the prologue. I didn't take the time to train on it. And had I done that, it was a last minute improvement that I felt, I could adapt to it. It was a wrong decision because had I trained on it, I would have realized I couldn't do a time trial where I couldn't pedal. So a lot of that was, thinking something, a little bit's good, even more is better.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work out that way.
So if 89 was defined by the battle between you and Fignon, 1990 is defined by the battle between you and Chiappucci. And then on stage 2, he gets out in the break and they take over 10 minutes on stage 2 in the break. What's going on behind? Why is there no one riding? How is this group? Because letting Chiappucci take so much time. I know he didn't go in probably as an out-and-out favorite, but he still went in as maybe a rider to be feared in the overall.
Oh, no, nobody knew about Chiappucci. No,
he was off the radar.
No, he was a domestic. Yeah, off the radar. In fact, the best rider there was Steve Bauer and Ronan Pensek, our guy. So what was
10 minutes wasn't a worry even for you guys?
Well, so it was rare because you had a team time from the afternoon. So you had 2 races. And so once they got a couple of minutes, 3-4 minutes, I mean, I had a rider there. Chiappucci Carrera had one. I think Steve Bauer's in 7-Eleven. I think it's 4 riders. So I didn't have to ride. Our team didn't have to ride. So why would we ride to chase back down our own teammate? So the other teams also did not. They're thinking about the team talk in the afternoon, and then they look on paper. Okay, are these the guys going to win the Tour de France? On paper, no. Steve Bauer, if anybody, would have been probably the best chances. He was 10th in 1985. Pensek, those 2. But why would our team chase? So they got a 10-minute lead, and I think everybody. I mean, Chiappucci surprised everybody on that one. I wasn't concerned at all, but I also, wasn't certain truly about my ability. I felt I had a good chance because Fignon wasn't there, and but that was just the way the race played out because, that's what's interesting about cycling. It's so much aerodynamics and your team preserving energy. You trying to preserve energy. It's you think, well, why wouldn't somebody chase down the peloton? I think a lot of people were underestimating Chiappucci like I did, and they got a 10-minute lead, and he ended up disappointing a lot of people. I mean, I think it would be probably Delgado and the Al-Endurance team that probably lost out the most.
How deep into that race in 1990 were you before you started thinking, okay, the legs are coming back around here. I actually have a chance. I know you were second on Alpe d'Huez that day. You were in the break you were sitting on because you guys had the jersey at that time. So Indurain was putting in a big shift into the base of Alpe d'Huez, and you got dipped on the line for second by Bunyo. Actually, you nearly went into the barriers in that sprint, I remember.
I got zipped on the line because of my middle finger. I shouldn't point my middle finger, but I got sausage hands, as my kids say. But
what happened to your finger?
Well, just before the Col de Granier. So you got the Quad Fair, Granier Quad Fair.
Quad Fair, yeah.
And just in the feed, I was riding up to through the little small town there, and I had both my hands in my back pocket, and I hit a pothole. And I went hands in my back pocket to my left and hit a woman. I think she had to be 75 to 80 years old. I flattened her.
God.
I flattened
she probably died.
No, I thought she did. I got up and I'm sitting there. Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? I was scared to death. And the husband comes up. Greg, she's off. She'll be fine. Get on your bike. That's what he said. Greg, get on your bike. So I went up. My finger was dislocated, and I pulled it out, put it back in, and so I caught up to the peloton. But when I came into the sprint there, I had the jump on him. But I had you got to feather your brake. I went to feather it, and this finger locked up. I couldn't brake, and that's why you see kind of I scrubbed all the speed off because I locked up with one other brake. So that was, I thought I could win that. I wanted to win the stage there, but I said I was go back, and I had the momentum, and then my finger locked up. So that's I think that's why I didn't succeed in the sprint. But
that stage was actually the first time I seen Indurain. Did you kind of have an inkling riding with him then? Did his performances then foreshadow what was to come?
No, no, not until Luzardi Dan, which is a week or two later. No, I didn't. Indurain was off the radar too. He was a good rider, but I mean, if you look back at his results, he had promising results earlier. But that was I didn't notice him. I didn't know really who he was until Luzardi Dan, which was week or 10 days later.
Yeah, but, that's late because you guys rode the Alps first that time, the way it went around France. Because I think Chiappucci still had over a 7-minute lead leaving the Alps. So even though you're saying he's a bit of not really on the radar coming into the race, with a 7-minute lead leaving the Alps, the GC guys have got to be pretty worried about him.
Oh yeah, I mean, I realized after L'Alpe d'Huez, I mean, he's riding better than anybody anticipated. And, but I felt like, okay, then I have to start chipping down the time anytime I can get, and I think it was even the next day or 2 days later.
Saint-Etienne, I think.
Yeah. But I say I look back and I just wasn't on the top of my game. I really started, unfortunately, it's like 89. I had mono and I just barely got to my conditioning at the tour. And I look at my time trial results. I wasn't my best. And, but I kept improving in the tour. And at Station Saint-Etienne, it was a really crossman, and I do really well in these hilly up and down circuits. And, we caught him and that's a split in the group. And I just, I think I took 4 or 5 minutes out of him on that day.
Yeah, I think you took 3 minutes. I'm trying to think back. Was it Saint-Etienne? Was that the day or was this the stage it was Luzardi Den when Chiappucci went in the break early on? That was stage 17. You went over to Tourmalet and then finished up Luzardi Den. That was the day you and Indurain into the finish.
Yep. So I say you got to be tactical. I mean, it was we had a really good team strategy. And you got to look at a race as a very long race, and you got to, very rare that a breakaway from the early stages of the climb, a mountain stage like that's going to stay away. And I think he made a fatal mistake. We covered it with some riders, and nobody was working, and he was, thinking he's Superman. And, we timed it to where I had 2-3 riders going breakaways so that the plan was for me to attack on Tourmalet, and I'd have teammates there to pull and then get to Luzardi and try to make up time there. And that's what kind of happened. But we had an added bonus for him going in the front. It kind of reminded me of Hino in 1986, where he took 5 minutes up because of the attack and the breakaway into Poma. Then the next day he thought he'd do a knockout on me, and then he went away an early breakaway by himself. And I'm like, that's suicidal. And it was suicidal for him. And
Two of the worst moves in Tour de France history.
Well, racing, it's not just being strong, it's being smart too. I said, I mean, sometimes I go, I wish I was stronger actually, but sometimes I won races on being tactically smart. But so I mean, I think the St. Etienne stage was critical for me, and I made up 5 minutes, which I think was that made me kind of put it back into reach, and I kept feeling better. So I still had a lot of confidence I could do it, but I knew that on the stage of St. Etienne, I mean, Les Ardennes, that was the stage I was hyper nervous because I knew that was the day I had to take as much time as I could back from him, if not all of it.
Your team were noticeably stronger in 1990, like that Les Ardennes stage. You still had quite a few guys around you deep into that stage, if I remember. How did that team stack up from 89 to 90?
Well, I said to myself, oh my God, it's my first Tour de France I've ever had a team with me. I said, it's so much easier. It's so much easier. In 86, I didn't have a team. I had nobody pacing me. I had nobody working for me. I got to ride a couple stages off of Fignons, but nobody, I've always been a rider without a team, really. I mean, either in 85, I was the domestique for Fignons, and in 86, I had nobody. Then 89, I had a great team. The riders on ADR were really great people. And Johan Museo there helped me a couple stages in the flats, but they did their best. But once we got through the first mountain stage, they were gone. So we're having the riders that were really good and capable. It just gives you so much more confidence. But there is energy saved when you have somebody to pace you. It's a big deal, a massive deal. And I think I underestimated that help. And I that goes back. I mean, if you jump ahead to 1991, I'm going, there's nobody here. There's no Fignon. I was riding, feeling better than I ever had since 1986. And I felt I got a good team. I'm going to win this thing breathing through my nose. And it turned out the opposite. But 89, I still remember almost getting a fist fight with Claude Criquillon before the stage, the Les Ardennes, because it was, he had an interview that day and I was so pissed at him. He said, this was kind of the mentality of cycling. I made so much money. He said, yeah, it's just not right that Gray's, almost winning the Tour de France when he was on vacation in the U.S., playing golf, eating cheeseburger. He went into that same old deal, and I just got so pissed. I said, you'd have no clue. I was actually so depressed from like a virus. I got so fatigued that I was in California trying to train, and the blue skies were great to me. I'd go out with my best friend this one year. He'd have a motorcycle, and I'd do motor pace. I'd make it 20 minutes from the hotel and fall asleep for 2 hours. So that was my spring. And it was almost a miracle I got better. And so when he said that, but it got my adrenaline going. So we got in a real pissy match before the stage. I think I did want to get in a fist fight with him, but we didn't do it.
So I think coming out of that stage, you were well and truly in command. You're like 5 seconds off the jersey in the perfect position with a time trial still to come. I know you're saying you weren't time trialing super well, but you've got to be really confident going into that time trial against Chiappucci. You just had a different level in terms of racing against the clock than he is.
Yeah, I did. I think this is how you could lose races, though. I think the next day after Les Ardennes, we had a stage. It was the last climb. I think it was very similar to this last year's stage, but we went over the Mary Blanc into finishing in Pau, and my team is wiped out from the work the day before, and a lot of attacks, and I'm in the lead group, but there's 20 in the lead group. Chiappucci with 5 Carrera riders. Sean Kelly was there. A lot of good riders, and I had a flat about 1.5 kilometers before the top of the climb, and I kept looking. I kept riding on the flat, but I kept looking for a team car. Wasn't there. Couldn't find a rider, and I got to the top of that climb and couldn't descend on it. I, took my wheel off. I waited 2.5 minutes for somebody to come along, and I finally got a wheel change. But I could see as we're climbing the last kilometer, Chiappucci looks back and sees me off the back, and I could see him yelling at his teammates, and they just took off. But I had 2 teammates, Gilbert de Gloucel at the Closewell, who were in a breakaway 8 minutes up. And de Gloucel, that was his hometown. He was going to finish, probably win the stage into Pau. And I never went down and climbed as fast as I did down a Murray Blanc. My teammates were going to wait for me. I said, no, keep going. I'll change the wheel. I think half a kilometer later, I caught him and passed him. I had to wait for him at the bottom of the climb. I think I went from 2.5 minutes to like probably 45 seconds, but they were going flat out. I had to wait for my teammates. So we stayed about 1.5 minutes behind them. And if it wasn't for my two teammates, Closewall and Duclos out, they literally turned around and waited 8 minutes for me to come back. And then they helped me bridge the gap. And that's where, that's the thing, that it's a team sport. And I wouldn't have won the tour that year without my team. And that's really what, for me, separated all my other tours. It was a really team victory that year versus just an individual tour. It was great because it was my first experience having a strong team around me. At that time, almost 9 years as a pro. And so it was an easy tour for me. The easiest victory ever.
You talked to a lot of...
The time trial, the irony about the time trial, I was so nervous and so not paranoid, but like I wanted to win the tour so bad. And then he was my main competition. And then I wasn't thinking even the team. I think back, why didn't I think of the stage victory? But I was so relieved, like the pressure, because I was trying to chip away time. So every day was like this challenge. And I got into time trial and I'm like, I got 2.5 minutes. I just kind of cruised. I didn't even think of the stage. I kind of go, why didn't I think of that? Today, I'm thinking back. But I think it was just kind of like, I got for 2 or 3 years with so much pressure of not performing well. And then I felt like I repeated 1990, like I repeated 89, coming from behind. And I think just mentally, it was kind of like just relieved that I was going to win the tour.
Third Tour de France win. Now, a lot of cycling analysts or cycling historians point to this moment between the 1990 season and the 1991 season as the sport gone, becoming high octane, we'll call it, that something happened in the peloton at about that point. You stopped winning. Other riders that maybe didn't have your talent started winning. Would you point to that moment around 90 to 91 as the high octane moment?
100%. A dramatic change. Although I don't think any of us recognized it at the time. Now, so I look back, I go, okay, I'm on the individual, not at my best. And in 1990, our team on the team classification. And so even that next year, the Trevitali was already a telltale sign. I mean, most of our team couldn't make it 2 weeks in the Trevitali. We all ended up, I had to retire after 2 weeks in the Trevitali. It was going too fast. Now, I had always allergies. I never always felt a little off the Trevitali, but it turns out I had really bad grass allergies, and it was worse in May. But our team didn't finish. And then the irony is, when I go home, I didn't have a power meter at that time, but I went home and I had a Vespa. That's where I did efforts up climbs. But the Vespa was always my time trial ability. I could tell what that speed I could do and how long I could sustain it. I was riding as well as in 1986, prior to the Tour de France that year. And I felt, even though my results weren't showing, I couldn't figure out why. But I was so used to kind of not feeling good this early season and then coming back that after I got shot. Before that, I was consistent from February through the Tour de France, even after that. But I got so used to kind of coming from behind. But prior to that tour, I knew I was riding really well. In fact, I was second in the prologue in the first stage in Saint Etienne. I was so strong, and I took 2.5 minutes on everybody. And even the team time trial, I forgot what, we didn't do that well, but I rode 50-60% of the time up front. And I just felt to my wife, I said, this is going to be one of my easier Tour de France ever. It was significantly better in 1990, significantly better. But even 5 days into that stage, I think we're going into Rennes, Champagne, capital of France. I don't know. It's kind of however you want to pronounce it.
My French is worse than yours.
Reims. I go Reims. Anyways, and we were doing speeds up these climbs that I'd never experienced. And of course, I go, God, I told my wife after, I said, I hope I'm as good as I feel. But it was kind of, I just still remember the stage going, wow, this is speeds that I never really recognized. But again, I thought maybe I just wasn't as good. But I ended up, basically winning the time trial at the prologue. I was at 8th, and normally if I'm doing well in the prologue, if I feel good in the prologue, I'm good. I'm back. And so that was a surprise. And each day, typically in the Tour de France, historically, every year, because we're all humans, we all race hard, and then there's always a fourth or fifth day that there's a lag. It's like everybody still gets fatigued at the same time. So there's a couple of days where they're, especially long stages of riding easy, then it's the battle again. And that's the first tour in my whole career that never had a let up. We didn't have that 5-day lag. And I look back, I know it's doing well because the time trials today are very short, but the first real long time trial was 70 kilometers. Interad turned out to be, 5-turn Tour de France winner and great time trials. But, I'm going to say this, I'm not accusing anybody, but there's a history of Conconi in relationship with the Banasso team. And I don't know Vindran what he was doing, but if he was, I don't know, but I know that time trial was I was 8 seconds behind him in 70 kilometers. So I know that I was racing at the top of my game at that tour. And I think it was 3 days later, this was probably the eye opener. And I still remember looking at Charlie Motet, who won that stage, but we were racing at Dinant, and it was 240 kilometer stage. We stopped 3 times for a train, but we averaged like over 50 kilometers an hour. In the last hour and a half, we were doing 60, 70 kilometers. And I'm going, never experienced that. And I think 3 days later, into a stage into Jaca in Spain, I was virtual leader. I think Luc LeBlanc might have had the yellow jersey. I can't remember. It's kind of it's funny when I race, I can remember every stage, but when you're not, they become like a nightmare. But it was a really hot stage, and I was struggling, but I had no teammates that day, and it was extremely hot, and I had run out of drinks 60 Ks before the finish, and everybody else getting feeds. My team car wasn't with me because we were following everybody in the back, and I've come down and 30 Ks to go, and I'm like, I need water. And Roger refused to do it because it was going to be a 10 or 20 second penalty. And I finally was going to get off my bike and let's give it. I ended up finishing just wiped out, and I had like heat stroke that day. And, but I think when I look back to the cumulative fatigue, if everybody's on EPO and the speeds like this, I think one of my strengths is I had a very high VO2 max in over 3 weeks. I was always just not working as hard as everybody every day. And at the end of the 3 weeks, my recovery was incredible. And in fact, going into the Tour de France, I rarely lost more than a kilo or two, which is really a big advantage when you're racing a tour. But then in 1991, I never had a day to recover. And I do look back, if I didn't have that stage of the Jaca, how would I finish? But I look back, it was a nightmare Tour de France for me. I still look back, I did pretty good. I even got second or third, I think third place in the last time trial. But that was such a dramatic change from all the tours that I ever did before that. It wasn't even the same
How
race.
open was the secret, Greg? Because I have a friend, and I won't say who it is because everyone will know who he is. He was riding a Vuelta a España in the mid-90s. And he said at that point, he was basically sure there was only him and 2 or 3 other guys who weren't taking EPO in the race. And every night his team would be saying to him, like, just take it. Like, why are you putting yourself through this? Just take it. It's so much easier once you take it. And he eventually caved and he took it. And he said the difference was just phenomenal. But at that point, he said he almost knew for a fact there was him and 2 or 3 others. They were just the whipping boys at the back of the bunch that weren't taking it. He said he could hardly go back for a bottle because every day the speed was just pinned 48, 50 kilometers an hour. How open was the use of EPO and other performance enhancing drugs in those early stages?
Excuse the short interruption. As you can see from the background, I'm over in beautiful sunny Girona, but this isn't my reality. Normally I'm time crunched in Dublin need to make the most of every single hour. That's why I heavily rely on my Watt bike. I love it and I recommend it to you because it just works. There's no 10-minute setup, no unfolding legs, banging my shins off stuff, or wrestling to take a back greasy wheel off. Just jump on and it works. It's also compatible with all the major e-gaming platforms, connects instantly. If you're looking for an indoor trainer, I couldn't recommend it any higher. It's the last indoor trainer you're ever going to need. Head on over to wattbike.com and use the code ROADMAN10. That's ROADMAN, TEN, and that's going to knock you 10% off your Watt bike today.
I say this without, I race in a French team, and, the one thing I know is when I race with PDM, I went back there and I'm so fortunate I was injured that year because at the end of the year, Tunis and Rooks were positive in the tour. I realized that was the first true organized doping team and I left that team for that reason. And I wanted them to get rid of whoever gave the drugs to Tunis and Rooks, and they wouldn't do that. And they knew that I was not going to participate, and we just kind of falling out, and I left the team. That's the first time I realized something. And I don't remember, it was 1991, and Johannes Dreyer, that was on PDM. His wife, middle of the night, I think 3 a.m, she called my wife. First ones that she talked to, her husband was passed away in the middle of the night.
So sad.
And so I think it was that year that we started hearing about EPO for the first time. But still, we didn't know how prevalent it was. And even then, you could talk to my teammates in 1991. We weren't suspecting. I'm not a typical rider that goes, I'm not racing well and I'm thinking somebody else is doing something. I got so used to not riding well from after 86 that I just figure it's part of the way I had, morphed after my hunting accident. So for me, I'm trying to think, I think it was 92 or 93 I'd say it's 93 that our team truly became aware of it. And this is when it was discovered that Ferrari and Conconi, and I think Ciccini were, those are the 3 doctors. And I say Conconi now is very well written, historically documented. Stefano Donati, he was, and that's why I don't maybe hold Indra the same accountability that I should maybe. Because I don't have proof, and I do believe some riders there had no clue if they were given something, because Conconi at the time was working for the Olympic Committee and the Olympics, for Italian Olympic, to do tests on how to detect EPO, but he was using pro riders as a guinea pig. So he's doing this, it's working both ends of the deal. And I believe that the rise of all these guys, Chiappucci and everything, I don't want to accuse them of doing, but it was such a quick transition from, I raced with Chiappucci since 85, 86, and he was a domestique. I'm sorry. He wasn't that good of a rider. And then I remember 92, he broke away to Sestriere. I won the Tour 3 times. I was last rider in that stage. I was an hour behind him. And I go, that was a tour but even then, I don't know. I try to think back. I don't think that was still the reason I gave why I didn't do well. It was kind of like, I kept looking, I started thinking something's wrong with me and physically. And, but I would say, I remember the team meeting in 1993. I can't remember if it was 92. I think it was the beginning of 1993. We had a new team. Team Z retired. The GAN insurance company called GAN had sponsored the team. And this is kind of how the doping can go on. So Roger Leger, I won the Tour de France once. We had a great 1990, but our team performed miserably outside of Duke Louisel winning Paris-Roubaix in 92. Roger was able to get a sponsorship, but not at the same level that he had with Team Z. And he was under intense pressure to get results. And I don't think he was aware that our riders weren't getting results because nobody was on a program. And some of the riders had known other riders and teamed. And I just remember Philippe Casado stood up and Roger Leger saying, guys, I got to tell you, I'm under intense pressure. And if you can't perform, we're going to have to reduce your salary, 50%. And I remember Cassidy said, listen, this is what's really happening in the teams. Got Ferrari, they're taking EPO, they're taking testosterone. And he said, either you lay off and let us race and no change in salary, or you deliver the same doctor, basically. And it wasn't that he was asking to do it. He's just saying, either you can't have, you can't just penalize us for not doping. But, and I more power to Roger. He said, no way I could ever do that. Ethically, there were already, Johannes Dreyer died. He said, I could never live with myself. There was health consequences. And I'm saying that was our team. And I never saw doping in the French teams. And I know that it existed, but I never saw it. And La Vie Claire, Renault, nothing. And so, but sadly, Philippe Casado at the end of 93, in 94, he left to Mercatone Uno. And I remember at the Curve Romedy, Eric Moore and I were at the start, and Philippe Casado came up and he said, he came up, he was always a really good attitude, always upbeat. And he said, oh God, you guys don't stand a chance. I just got done with Tour of Spain. We call it breathing through your nose. That means there's no effort. He said, I wasn't even in good shape, but I was given EPO, growth hormone testosterone. He said, you guys can't compete without it. It's impossible. He said,
makes that much difference.
It's transformational. And
so why do you think then?
Both Eric and I looked at each other. This is the truth. We said, it's time to quit. And I was racing, and I started using a power meter in 92. And the irony is I would go out, if I wasn't racing with the Peloton, I would get to really close to what I thought was world-class, 400 watts up a climb, 390, 400 watts. And that's really kind of, even if you look back at some of the studies, that's what I averaged up the tour. Although I go, what did I really average? Because I wasn't riding my best. I think maybe in 86, I was higher than that. But when I would, in a really well-trained program where I could train and rest, I was good. The moment I got into racing, my watts, and this is me specifically, and Roger Leger, my coach at the time, I felt like I was always a whiner, but I kept saying, je suis fatigué. I'm always tired. My arms are heavy. I was always so tired in between races. And I found a strange deal in 93 and 94 that the more as I raced, and typically when you're fatigued, your power goes down, but your heart rate corresponds. And heart rate was sometimes staying at a high level, like peak, and then I would see a 15-20% drop in my power output. And in the end, it turned out to be that I had a mitochondrial disease. Mitochondria is the power cells that produce ATP. That's where you take your blood, fuel, everything. You generate ATP through anaerobic glycosis and aerobic. And when I did a biopsy, 20% of my mitochondria weren't functioning. So there was something going on with me. And I met a scientist from Brussels who I actually saw when I had Epstein-Barr. He's the one that diagnosed me. He felt that I was having damage from the lead poisoning, that it was causing my mitochondria to shut down. And I think it's true. So it was a very confusing last 2 years, but we jokingly said the highest paid bike rider in the Peloton was Dr. Ferrari. And because the rumor was he was getting 10 to 20% of each rider's salary. Now, if you think of the riders that dominated, think of what's the team that was Paris-Roubaix, that 5 riders with breakaway.
Yeah. They went 1, 2, 3.
Aristea. It was obnoxious. It truly was obnoxious. It was like, it's when I look back, I was so into my own suffering that I didn't even follow cycling. I had no clue who was running races in 93, 94, because I was barely able to finish races. But when I look back, it was a massive transformation. I truly believe if EPO didn't happen, I would have won 5 tours.
Do you think it shortened your career?
Absolutely. I would have won 91. I'm certain I would have won 91 without, if EPO wasn't there. I believe I was a better rider than Duran, and even my performance results show that. It's just interesting because you hear about different stories. I heard Indurain has a 92 VO2 max. Then I heard, well, he's not. He's got a lower one, but somehow they changed it. But this goes to Armstrong. He literally had a 70 VO2 max, 79. But the wattage he was doing, he had over 100 milliliters of oxygen, which is impossible. But I think a lot of riders got cheated out of their career. And I think the one rider that, in this irony, this is crazy about Fignon, and this has been the way I've looked at it. And there's a lot of riders that say, like an Andy Hampstead, who I don't think he experienced the physical fatigue I did, or some of the other riders. And part of it was because Fignon had, when I talked to him in 2009, he described, without even prompting, he told me Gatorade was everybody's on EPO. He wouldn't do it. But he said, I was so tired I couldn't get in the Grand Plateau, the big chain ring. And he said, I was so tired that I would race and go home and rest. He said, I could barely lift my arms. Like, oh, you got to be kidding me. That was me. I felt like I would just, ça va, how are you doing today? That's what you'd say every morning. Je suis fatigué. That's what I'd say, je suis fatigué. And Roger Leger would go crazy going, come on, you can't be tired every day. I'm tired every day. And I looked at it because when you are normally in the front of the group, when you're riding well at home, you're feeling good. I would ride in the front until I blew. And most domestiques, let's say, riders that aren't used to being there, they'll get their physical limit and they'll back off. So they were always keeping with their limit. That means they recovered. I would go in and blow up. And it was like basically chronically overtraining, like doing too many intervals. And I think Fignon did the same thing. We would ride expecting, why shouldn't we be next to Inter? Why shouldn't we be next to these guys that we were dropping a year before, 2 years before? And we would go to a blue. And when you do that every race, you get fried. And so, anyways, it really, sadly, really did darken the end of my career. I mean, I left cycling with a bad taste in my mouth. I did not like the sport when I ended.
Why do you think when we look back now at cycling, like you talk about PDM, like they're a pretty prolific doping reputation as a team. Sean Kelly is in that team. Sean Kelly tests positive for performance-enhancing drugs during his career, but his reputation is largely unsullied from that. You also look at like the likes of Marco Pantani, well-documented book on the death of Marco Pantani, where it talks, quite openly about historic drug use basically all through his career, but yet he's a hero in Italy. But then there's other riders that are totally demonized for the exact same behavior. It seems like we've a real double standard when it comes to how we view them.
Well, I think there's different levels of, I do believe some of the riders, I struggle with Indurain. I'm going to say this because I don't want to accuse him of anything, but he's a really good person. I like him. And I read enough to know that if by chance he was given stuff, I don't think he purposely said, okay. I think there was, even some of these teams, they don't tell you exactly. I think PDM told riders they're just taking some vitamins. They do drug tests. And then the problem is they get in there and the doctors, from a physiological part, from a medical perspective, absolutely, you could say that somebody racing the Tour de France should be taking testosterone because the testosterone, you're eating testosterone, your cortisol levels go up, the stress hormone. So to get back to homeostasis, take steroids, but it's illegal. And of course, that's the whole challenge of racing naturally, is that it's the natural talent and smart racing tactics, how you save energy. That is how you succeed in racing. It isn't trying to constantly balance it. I hear this argument, well, you are genetically better. Why shouldn't somebody take drugs to be equal to you? I said, well, that's
just
the way it is.
It's black and white. It's our rules.
So then why do we have sports at all? If that's the case, then, then do car racing and, car racing and everything's leveled. That's not sports. So there's always this justification, but I would say the riders, I look back, I'm pissed off the governing body. I think Heinver Bruggen, he knew exactly what was going on. And I always look at Graham Obrey as a victim of old world ego and disgusts me, because here's a guy that's brilliant, creative. He goes on and he breaks the hour record, but it upset Francesca Moser and the traditional. And the hour record is one place where you allow people to be creative aerodynamics, and he blew people away. but he went against the grain. And they spent more time trying to take away his deal, his titles. In the meantime, they turned a blind eye to the massive amount of doping. It was so well known that if Verbruggen absolutely knew what was going on. And so I always look, if you corrupt at the top, it corrupts everybody below. And the riders, I call them compliant victims, because I don't believe any rider starts off at 15, 16, falls in love with cycling, plans on doping. But the sport is so hard, and then you get these doctors like Ferrari, and that they convince you it's not harmful. Everybody else is doing it, but it's not true. And but they convince themselves, and they justify it because they believe everybody's doing it. And well, I don't want to be a disadvantage. And sadly, there's a lot of people. Who's the guy that the French writer that talked out about Armstrong?
But
come on.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Obviously, you know there's there's talent probably way better than Armstrong that didn't do it. I know that there's a lot of riders out there that were way better than Armstrong that you never saw, because Armstrong, I hate to say it, was a very mediocre talent. He had a 78 or 79 VO2 max will not win you, won't get you in the top 20 of the Tour de France. I'm sorry, it wouldn't. And I've seen his physiology, I've seen the test. And so you go, who was the victims? The people who chose not to do it were victims of it. So what were their choices? Either get fired. I mean, the problem even then is, by a certain point, if you weren't willing to do it, you're going to get off. You're going to be let go of the team. And to me, I still look at the French teams. I think after Festina affair, they were the cleanest and most ethically correct teams, because it became criminal in France. And I don't think the French are born cheaters. They're just not. I've raced with them. I think riders, if they're given a chance, of course, every rider, if they can get away with it and never be shamed, and and if everybody's doing it, they'd probably try to get away with it. That's why controls and penalties have to be in place, because athletes are humans and they all want to be competitive, and it takes a very special family and with ethics and morals to avoid that. And even then, I'm skeptical, because I was blessed with a massive talent, a really, truly 1 in 10 million talent. And so I was already at 18 years old. I was winning pro-am races. At 19, I was third at Dauphiné with Fignons and the Alps. So I felt like I never had to do anything, because I was already there. I was competitive at the moment I turned pro. And I didn't come from a history of any cycling. I came from America. But had I turned pro in 1992 with the same passion I had in cycling, I don't know what I would have done. I would love to believe I wouldn't do that, but I can't say, because I goes back to 1988. I am so lucky that I was injured that year and I was out from PDM, because if one time I was vulnerable, I could have been easily convinced to take some stuff to recover. You had a hunting accident, you need this. And had I done that, I think the danger is you take something and you have a good race. You don't think you can do without it. And I truly believe that. I think once riders dope, they could never go clean, because it's a big difference.
Can you allow yourself any amount of sympathy for the position that Armstrong found himself in? So he takes EPO. At a certain point, he wins Tour 1, he wins Tour 2, he wins Tour 3. At a certain point now, there's a big support team that are all invested in this Armstrong brand. And there's mechanics, soigneurs, publicists. Everyone's going to lose a job. That the lie gets so big at some point that...
the lie was there before he won the Tour. The lie was there. No, he was... I think that's accepted to Armstrong, is that, Pantani wasn't a bully. He wasn't a guy that threatened people. Armstrong got what was given to him because he treated people like shit and threatened everybody who went against him. But he knew what he was doing. And they still don't think the whole story about Armstrong's victories is pure EPO. I'm just telling you, it's not. Something doesn't add up in his performance. His wattage output versus his VO2 max, even with EPO, doesn't make sense. It's even with EPO. He says that the most talented rider in that time was Jan Ullrich by far. And I think that Armstrong, he bribed the UCI drug. In 1999. So he had a get out of jail card that no other rider had. So I don't look him at all like the other riders. In fact, with Pantani, I met him in 2002, and he's a hero now, but he was villainized at the time.
Maybe what led to his death also as well.
Yeah, and he had a high EPO. He wasn't caught with doping. He had a high red blood cell count. And so at the same time, he knows what's happening with Armstrong. And Armstrong's like the hero, the comeback king, like can't do anything wrong. Then you have Pantani, who, like everybody else is doing it, he is treated like a villain. So, and you look at it, I met him, this kid's, he's a nice guy. I could tell you, he was suffering from depression. We talked about depression. And, but I look at him, he came from a family that had ethics and morals, and he knew what he was doing wasn't what he really wanted to do. And that's part of the shame. He got busted. And, I look at Tyler Hamilton, Floyd Landis too. There's a lot of shame involved in getting outed, and they all end up drinking. And why did they do that? It's kind of self-medicating. And that's what happened to Pantani. His morals conflicted with what he did as a cyclist. And that's where I said, you're not looking at, take a Peloton, there's going to be people, they don't give a shit. I mean, they'll look at it like everybody's doing it. But there's a lot of people that go, that's not who I am. That's not my core values. Like for me, it's just something I would have never felt like any of my victories were legitimate. Yeah. And I still think there's a lot of riders that race with that were doped. They end up going, I think there's a lot of riders that haven't taken pride in their careers because they know they were. Imagine, I've seen videos of in the mid 2000s. I mean, individual riders, Russians. I have a tape that somebody gave me. I mean, they're doing this. They're talking to their girlfriend while they're doing an IV, a blood transfusion, and it became like a really dark laboratory. I mean, you were like an experimental rat, you cyclist. And I still think of, I forgot De La Cuevas. I can't remember the rider who crashed in the Tour de France, and the director, they had given him maybe the Spanish rider, they'd given him a bad of blood or something like, or new experimental drug I think it was a new experimental drug, and the guy almost died. And first thing the director sportif didn't say, try to save the kid's life. He just came up to him as he passed out. You better not say anything. He's trying to protect himself and the team. Didn't give a shit about his life, the kid's life. Crazy. And then they were given, I heard they were giving riders antidepressants. And I've taken antidepressants, and I could tell you, trying to get off an antidepressant is you could commit suicide because it's your brain, the serotonin reuptake inhibitors. You stop that, it's like you crash. And I would tell you, it's like I think of these riders. Man, I'm happy there's not more suicides after racing. So
I think the mental health part is a part that was brushed over in all that. And I know you mentioned Tyler Hamilton there. Tyler, I had him on the podcast when I started the podcast really early, and I've had him on a bunch of times since. And you know what? I'd call Tyler a friend now. He's a nice guy, and I don't think just broadly in society, I don't think we are the worst thing we've ever done. I don't think if you take one data point, one snapshot of the worst thing I've ever done, and you use that to judge my whole character, it's not a fair assessment of someone's character.
Absolutely. And I think I used Tyler Hamilton as I met Tyler Hamilton early in the 90s, and he's a really nice guy. And I think that's why he couldn't, and Armstrong could lie through his teeth. It doesn't bother him at all. But the fact that Tyler had to lie about things and then never came clean on it just ate him up. He ended up drinking, ended up destroying his life. And really, the fact that he came out was the healing part. And he had no more lies. And I think I feel bad for Jan Ulrich because he was implicated in Operation Puerto and denied it, but suffered for 15 years, addiction and drinking. And had he been able to come clean and right away, and this is, the irony with like Floyd Land, come right away. Let's say when he was discovered with Operation Puerto, people are forgiving. If you could admit your mistakes, and
it's very cleansing. I think.
It is. And I tried to convince that to Floyd Landis in 2006. I think I found out he was positive before he did, and I already heard rumors. And I all I just had said, Floyd. Somebody asked me, I said, Floyd, just do not do what Tyler did. Come clean. And because I actually talked to him, I was trying to propose to the WADA that, you should be really looking at plea bargains. And if you'd had gone in and busted riders in the 90s and they were given a chance to race again right away, but they had to out everybody who was in part of, from the Swan year to the knee director to the doctor. And those guys were permanently banned for life. that's how you stop the chain, and with really strong controls. But you look at, I remember reading about Operation Puerto, 2006. A guy named Dr. Mabuse, Mr. Mabuse, was implicated. And Guimard told a story about this same veterinarian. Then he was doing the tour in 1971. The guy gave him cortisone injection, almost destroyed his knees. And here I go, 71 to 2006, this same guy is still doping riders. So Ferrari's still doing it today. And Conconi's, I don't know what Conconi's doing, but Ferrari's still involved with cycling and riders. So I look at riders, and I said, Armstrong's not the same as Pantani. It's not the same as, he manipulated, he used his cancer as a Teflon shield. Any other rider, he was positive in 1999 in his first year. And that's
who was to blame for covering that up? Was that Verbruggen, McQuaid? Who was there at that time?
I believe it was the team. It was the whole sport didn't want. I mean, they just got over Festina. Think of that, getting over Festina, and then have another rider destroy the Tour de France. So I look at the whole culture didn't want that exposed. But he was so you have that contrast compared to Pantani, who was vilified as a bandito, and I just had a hard time even with Armstrong. This is before we had our run-in, but the way he treated riders, he mocked and treated like Pantani like he was an idiot. There's certain people that are born cheaters, and Armstrong's a born cheater. I'm sorry, he is.
Well, I love that expression. It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Yeah, that's right. Well, but sadly, in the truth in the world, really bad people get away with a lot of stuff, and unfortunately, a lot of people make extreme wealth through cheating and unethical things. But if they could live with them, so that's fine. I mean, I couldn't do it.
But do you think we need to change the equation? Because for me, it's incentives. So you have if you cheat, the potential upside of cheating, it's multi-million-dollar contracts, endorsement deals, fame, rock star girlfriends. The downside of getting cheating, it's a 2 to 4 year holiday, and then you come back into the sport. It doesn't seem like the penalty fits the crime. I know there's reputational damage as well, but we've seen with Valverde, people get over that pretty fast, and everyone's talking about what an amazing career Valverde had. He's just on the podium, the gravel worlds.
They should get back into the sport unless I said they have to give something back. That means they have to give who their sources are. If he said, "Oh, it's by myself, I didn't have anybody," then he's banned for life. I'm saying that to get the root cause, you're not going to get rid of doping unless you get rid of the suppliers. And then I think riders need to have an incentive to be honest. It's kind of the opposite. Yeah. But if they can't be honest, there's always a team that's working together to do this. The most important thing is continued advancement in medical drug testing. And I said the biggest risk for me in the last 20 years has been motor doping. And I think motor doping has been there since the late 90s, and it's won a lot of big races. And I still think that's a big risk because I think that people don't believe it's there. I can promise you it's there. It's in the peloton. Do I see it today? There? I think I've heard rumors that it could be. It doesn't take a whole lot of help to make a big difference. I try to tell people, you got a power driver, like you buy at a hardware store, like they call it. You got a drill, or you can do a power driver that has a more torque. A good e-bike motor that for cities is 40 Newton meters of torque. Power driver has 500 Newton meters of torque. And it's got a little battery pack like this big. And you put that on you only need 5 minutes at that. You probably have 5 minutes on somebody on a climb. And so the hidden motor that I think was used to win many tours that I've had a bike, it's a 250 watt motor that will give you 18 minutes at 250 watts or 30 minutes at 150 watts.
And just to put that into context, so I'm still racing Cat 1, and the difference between me being a local Cat 1 warrior and winning stages in Tour de France, it's a lot less than 100 watts. So absolutely. A 250 watt difference is massive.
So let's say you're a rider that high 70s, say equal weight to me, you're capable of 340 watts, right? I'm capable of 400 watts.
Yeah,
so
I'll do at about 76 kilos last year. I think I was doing around 395 watts.
That's
at
really
76
good.
kilos. Yeah, it's not bad, but I'm like, I can't,
But now,
I can do that fresh.
Now, if you race today, you go on starvation diets, you probably get your VO2. You could win a lot of races. I think it's interesting today. I have a little different philosophy about the speeds, and everybody's going, oh, they have to be doing something because of the faster climbs. But I think the morphology of riders today versus even 10, 15 years ago has changed a lot. And had I been racing today, I probably, instead of racing 68 kilos, probably raced at 65 or 64. Now, every kilo is about a minute and a half up a climb. And I don't think the only way I could get there, because I was at 4 or 5% body fat. But I've read and heard riders, going on diets. And I don't know how they're doing this, because if you restrict calories too much, your body goes in a catabolic state, and it'll eat muscle mass for fuel. So what I've heard is riders go on, they take cortisone and they starve. So they're literally eating muscle mass away. But in order to get out of there, you have to take testosterone to recover. But I think that's what you're seeing riders today riders look like, 12-year-olds on a bike today. They're so
I've
skinny.
even heard of riders taking drugs to decalcify their bones to make them lighter.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's why.
That's great. But
I've heard that off record now, that we're seeing a lot of breaks and crashes because of that, because the bones are so brittle.
Well, they would do that anyways. It would happen anyways if you're truly training for periods, and your body is so efficient. When I would start the season, and contrary to everybody, I did underwater fat test and everything. I mean, the highest I ever got was 9% for 1 year. I think it might have been 1992 or 93, but I typically is 5 to 7%. But before 86, Coakley, everybody had to show up at 5%. So we were very thin. What you don't see today is, if you look back in the racing, we were bigger riders. And so what happened now, if you diet and you train really long and you're taking cortisone, you can go into catabolic state and eat away muscle mass. So riders are very thin. If I think a Vingegaard is he's my height, and he's 60 kilos, 61 kilos. Yeah. That's 8 kilos lighter. That's why he has a high VO2 max at 96 milliliters. But because of his weight, now he weighed the same weight as me, his VO2 max would be significantly lower. But that's, so so for sure, if you're producing 76 kilos, now imagine if you go to 68 kilos.
I raced at 68 when I was in France for a season.
68 kilos.
It was horrible. Horrible.
At 68 kilos, I'm sorry, 68 kilos at 395, that's my wattage output.
Yeah, but the problem is, what I'd seen when I was training with and racing with guys who are world tour level, I can put out those numbers when I'm, jumping on a Zwift ride and I warm up, or I'm doing a local TT. But these guys can do it after 5 hours. They can do it after 6 hours. They can do it after 7 hours.
This is a very good topic, because I keep hearing people about, he's doing 700 watts. There's only one wattage output that matters. It's the functional power output, your threshold. That's the only one that you could really compare, because I keep hearing normalized power output extended. What they're doing is they're trying to take these higher peaks, and that they're actually achieving a higher average wattage. The only one that is the gold standard, goes back to when I started using power meter, is what you can sustain for, say, 30 to 40 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
And that's what I call, when you talk about climate outputs, that's the one that matters, because I've been able to do, I remember before the Dauphiné, and this is it's crazy, and Dauphiné in 1994, I was racing horribly, but I did a small climb, but for 20 minutes, averaged 430 watts.
Yeah, that's huge.
Clean. But it can't for 20 minutes. So it's the wattage output that you go. My sprinting ability, even at the end of my career, I didn't use the power meter when I was racing, but I do 1,1500 watts in a sprint. I remember doing Tour of Flanders one year. I quit after 16 climbs, but I did most of the climbs I was doing around 500 watts or more.
Well, Fred Wright was on the podcast recently. Fred Wright's the British champ at the moment, riding for Bahrain. And he's been top 10 in Tour of Flanders the last 2 years. He averaged somewhere between 350 and 360 watts for the entire Tour of Flanders this year.
For Flanders, yeah.
Tour of Flanders.
The question is how much watts, because that's where, because it's racing really fast and steady. But what you realize in cycling And I just want to clarify this with people who start comparing watts people are cheating because, I read this last year. Pogacar, however you want to pronounce his name. He averaged 400 or 500 watts for a minute in a climb. Of course you could do that. It's the sustainability of over 40 minutes that matters. If you watch the power output on a climb, you're going to see jumps of 450 down below, all that. But it's all about your lactate threshold. It's all about your metabolism, lactate, and your fueling. And so when you get to really high level of the tour, you can ride very close to your VO2 max, and you can go above your threshold for a short period, but you have to come back and recover. But when I hear people going, I guess they're jumping to conclusion because they're going faster up a climb, I look at today and I go, and I'm an optimist, so there could be, I've heard some motors, I've heard this, but I looked at Chiappucci, I think it was, who won the Grand Colombier stage this year? I think Chiappucci, I think he was.
Yeah, I think it might have been Chiappucci actually, yeah.
But he released his power. He used to average 375 watts. He had a 3-minute lead at the bottom of the climb. He didn't gain this, 30, 40 Ks before, it was just before. He lost 3 minutes to the Vingegaard, Pogacar at the top. I figure they're doing, and I always compare myself. Pogacar's 68 kilos. He probably averaged 420 watts, 410 to 420 watts to be at the top. To me, there's no indication of massive doping nor of a power meter. And I think Pogacar's the most talented rider. I think if he loses 2 kilos, he'll take Vingegaard. Vingegaard is absolutely the skinniest guy I've ever seen.
Yeah, he's unbelievable.
So these guys are riding pretty fast up the climbs because they're very thin. And it's always been, even back when I raced, it was a power to weight ratio. It was very important. I mean, I got scars on my body from somebody pinching me all the time. Like, if you had more than 2 millimeters of fat, you're fat. And so, but it's sadly for the riders today, it's become, people are aware that it's such a big advantage weight that now they're looking at how do we get below 5% body fat. I was shocked even when I heard that some riders, even like Chris Froome, is 9% body fat. I'd never raced at the Tour de France at 9%. But part of that is muscle weighs a lot more than fat. If you lose a lot of muscle mass, your percentage of fat, you could be 130 pounds, 120 pounds, but you could have high percentage of body fat because the muscle density in your body is very low. And so the irony is, riders, I get over the Tour, I'm at 3% body fat, but I have muscle mass weighs a lot. And even when I was racing, I have bicep muscles. Today, if I was racing, I would probably have to race 3 or 4 kilos to be competitive. And so I look at rider. I look really optimistically at the racing right now. I think they're riding what's really back to normal, even though they're going fast. Stages are shorter. The equipment, every rider is. This is why I go back to the debate with Antoine Veyer. I haven't debated with him, but you can't just go back. The only way you can see if riders are really going faster is to know somebody's VO2 max, take the same weight, and then do real calculations on the road. I don't see any crazy rides at 450, 475 watts, which would indicate doping. The hidden deal is you could have a motor and show on your wattage deal you're only doing 400 watts, but you add 50 watts there. You can't discover that. So it is good to have some time reference up a climb. But the mechanical doping should be eliminated immediately because it's all about an X-ray. You can X-ray every bike in 30 a minute if the sport wants to make sure that doesn't happen.
When you have time to reflect now, Greg, and you sit quietly and you look back on your entire career, is there anything you regret? Anything you would have done different? Even I'm thinking, even post-career, do you regret taking that bottle to Armstrong?
I didn't take it to him. That's the irony. I was armed with so much more information than I even let out. By 2000s, when his mechanic, Julie DeVries, told me what's going on, and I didn't come public with that. And the irony is I kept hearing stuff that was brought to me. I never sought it out. I mean, I remember in 1999, I think James Stark, he'll hear this, but he called me in October. He said, "Oh, Greg, because I was a big cheerleader for Armstrong. I I don't think it's real. He said, I heard about this hospital scene where he admitted to all these drugs. So I heard that. I kind of dismissed it. I, remember hearing a teammate of mine tell me that Armstrong, before this 1990 tour, that he's going to win it. He has something that's undetectable. And I kind of left that off. And then I found out he was Ferrari. That was the deal for me. It was a deal killer. But I was caught in an interview with David Walsh at my home after the 2001 tour. And he had just outed Armstrong and Ferrari's relationship before the tour. And Armstrong got wind of it. And to me, you can't be this clean rider and have a relation with Ferrari. But he preempted it with this magical PR deal, announcing it before the article came out in the newspaper that he was using Ferrari for diet and training for the hour record. Well, he never did the hour record, and it was a way to diffuse the shock of that news. And I just one time just said, David, you're going in the right direction, because I knew that he was, seeing Ferrari. He said, and I said, my mom taught me, and I remember in 2000 when I learned about what Armstrong was doing just from Julian. My mom taught me, my parents, if I don't have any good thing to say, don't say it at all. And so I had tried to figure out even a comment in 2000 when Armstrong won, because unfortunately for me, I was the American rider and he was a new rider. This was winning the tour, and everybody called me, tell me, ask me my opinion. And I remember 2000, all I could say that was honest to me was, I didn't want to be the one that broke the news. I just said his victory is unbelievable. And so you take it two ways. It's not believable or it's unbelievable. I don't know. It was one way I could be honest with myself. And then I think 2001, David Walsh, I did not know it was him. I got a ring, I think 3-4 days after the tour, a week after. And, hey, Greg, this is David. I said, hey, David, how you doing? And wanted me to comment on his victory. And I said, David, I have nothing I say will be good. It will be taken as whatever you want to take it, and it will be not good. And he said, he wanted to get me to, he knew what I congratulated him on his investigative reporting, but he wanted a quote from me. And I said, I have nothing good to say. And he said, well, would you agree that if he's clean, it'd be the greatest comeback in the history of sport? And I said, yes. And if he wasn't, I said, well, it'd be the greatest fraud. Well, newspaper came out, Greg LeMond, greatest comeback. And it became my quote. And Armstrong called me up a week later and threatened me. And I had Trek CEO, I had Tom Weisel all threatening me. And, USA Today, a guy named Sal Rubel came out with an apology for me, which I never gave. And it was like I was not given a choice. I was going to have my bike company, everything destroyed. I didn't go along with it, but I refused to even sign off on the press release, but it came out anyways. And so I didn't start that battle, Armstrong did. But he started because he knows that I knew that he is the one. They used the early political strategy, what you see today. They had a group called Public Strategies, which was they were political people, a consulting group that would attack political opponents and with false information. And they started creating this kind of Greg's a sore loser. I still remember in 1994, I did an interview with LeMond, and I just said Armstrong is threatening my way of life. It did come out as he's threatened my life. I said he's threatening my way of living. But I remember Trek.
What did you mean by that?
Well, I was pretty open to saying, I can't really comment. I said he has basically used attorneys and relation with Trek, and he's threatening my way of making a living if I speak out. And I said, I'm kind of looking. I figured Armstrong could get busted, and I thought I had a good relation with Trek and John Burke, and I figured one day it's going to get busted. I didn't want to destroy what I thought was a good relationship, but I was asked more about, why aren't you commenting? I said, because I'm got a gag order on me. I said, if I talk, my bike company's going to be destroyed. And so it came out that he threatened my way of life. And I remember my attorney getting a call from Trek saying the contract's over. For what? Because what? He said, well, apparently an interview with you said that Armstrong threatened your life. I said, what? Well, I said he's certainly my way of life. He said, it doesn't matter. And he said, well, it hit the press. And I said, what? It was supposed to come on Sunday. I looked at Google or whatever is at that time, the news source in 2004. It had not even hit the U.S. news. And Trek claimed it did. And then they produced all these supposed emails that, I was going to buy a LeMond. Now I'm not going to buy a LeMond, or I'm not going to buy Trek. They produced 100 of them before the news even got to the U.S. They're all fake. They did this. And this is kind of the stuff that they, Trek and Armstrong, and they did to me for years.
And the hilarious part about that, Greg, it's one of the comments that was on our YouTube, and I must have got I don't know, tens, if not 20, 30, 40 DMs or emails from people of various iterations of, I've taken a note here, I'll never buy a Trek or Bell helmets again after watching that last interview. Team Greg.
Okay. It was, I like to say it was, it impacted me dramatically because I would talk in short sentences. I watched every word I said. I had an attorney for bike riders who came up, he'd call me and said, Greg, person you thought was a friend, I'll say it right now, Bob Roll, I don't care if he hears this, was wired. I was in a bike shop and they sold my bikes, Ron Kiefel's bike shop. And the attorney said he was wired trying to get you to say something that was libelous. And the goal with Armstrong was to get me to say something that they could threaten me with. Yeah. And so I became very paranoid, whoever I talked to. And it impacts me today. I have became less outspoken, less, kind of like an abused person. You end up watching everything you say because you're going to get knocked out. And it did have a big impact because what I hated about that was it took my voice away. This is a sport I loved, and it shut me down. And my only regret is I would have just said, I wanted to preserve my bike. I wanted to preserve this relationship with Trek. And I felt that it was just a matter of time. But I realized, no, it wasn't. It didn't matter. I thought John Burke would appreciate somebody who's ethical and honest. And I told him, well, people vote 50% Republican, 50% Democrat. Let people buy LeMond, let people buy Trek. And, but I'm certain Trek gave him Armstrong gave him the ultimatum. So I was over there. Had I really looked back, my only regret is I just didn't divorce myself from Trek earlier on and go my separate way, because I spent so many years defending myself and lawyer fees that with Trek, the lawsuit itself was just, when I write a book about it, because it's just so bizarre. I ended up having to settle with them because of crazy stuff that shouldn't have happened in my lawsuit. So it's a very difficult, but I couldn't have changed that. Do I regret if I look back, I go, yeah, I would have, what I regret is being cryptic about stuff, not just going fully, that I was fully aware of what Armstrong was doing. Like, should have told him about everything I was told in 2000, should have told him everything that I knew. And then I'm not just sitting here jealous. This is like, I got information I didn't even want to hear. Honestly, I didn't want to hear it. I was given to it, shoved down my throat or put into my ears. But once you become aware of that, imagine in 2000, he's with Ferrari. He is juiced to the gill. He's denigrating Pantani. He's making commercials like, I just train harder. It became like, you're watching this fraud and you're going, it was sickening. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'm a cancer survivor. This is what I did. No, it was anger underneath there. He was like, putting this middle finger to the world. And people bought into that, which is like, okay, some people buy into, that's not a champion. That's like a psychopath. That's a crazy guy that's got possessed for winning. And I just go, Armstrong, I believe, did get caught up. I'm not saying that. It's very addicted to win the tour. But, I can't say it's all him. I think he had some very bad advisors. And I think that people around him were part of that whole deal. I believe Tom Weisel wasn't the best guy either. And I think Armstrong, maybe with a different person who advised him differently, might have acted differently. I don't know. But Armstrong hasn't been he was, you know, the irony is if he would have let me, if we just argued it out, you know, he could, oh, that's your opinion. We probably wouldn't have had this ongoing feud, but what you realize is, I hate being bullied. Somebody bullies me. I don't care. I'll go down before I have to capitulate. And so, but do I regret? I regret that it took so much energy and away from my family. It damaged, really hurt my kids. I mean, people, you know, they were all impacted by it because people treated me like I was some has-been cyclist that was just jealous of Armstrong. And I have no jealousy for anybody. I don't envy anybody. I like my life. I like what I've done. And I'm the last person to kind of start assuming people are cheating to get ahead. It's only when I get overwhelmed with facts that becomes, once you kind of know the truth, it's very hard to sit back and, either I literally did kind of have to walk away from the sport after that because it was, I couldn't be honest talking to journalists. And I was threatened with a lawsuit for almost 10 years at that point. And it became, so my only regret is I look at business, I think of the time I spent defending myself. I could have just walked away from there and taken that same money and built stuff, created stuff. Anyways.
Excuse the really short interruption. I wanted a way to bring the Roadman virtual community together for a weekly meetup. I was a little bit frustrated with the Coffee Ride virtual community, so I said, let's test ourselves. Each week, we're going to have a race against the clock. Just you, me, and the rest of the Roadman community. To join this weekly 16-kilometer time trial, click on the Discord link below, and all the details for our My Whoosh weekly ride are in our Discord group. Can't wait to race you next Tuesday.
Greg, we started the podcast with some YouTube feedback. I'm going to end it with that as well. Somebody said the most famous quote in cycling is attributed to you, and they wanted to know if you actually ever said it. It never gets easier, you just go faster.
That's an official quote for me at 18 years old. I think it was 19 years old. 19 years old. I had just signed my contract with Renault on the Champs-Élysées in 1980. And then we had an official signing PR deal with Renault in New York City. And I was staying at the United Nations Plaza Hotel. And this weird American journalist was, there. And I don't know, she's like some, mystical, I don't know what she was writing for but she kept trying to say, do I have an out of body experience when I go hard? And I kept trying to say, I just remember when I got in cycling, it hurt when I remember one hill out of Carson City that my first time I had to walk up, and it was super headwind, but that climb every time was just as hard because I just went faster. So I just said, it doesn't get easier. You just go faster because you literally just push yourself, you go faster. So now that was an official quote, my quote at 19 years old. But I was just trying to explain to some woman, hey, there's no, out of body experience here. Doesn't get easier, just go faster.
Greg LeMond, the greatest American cyclist of all time. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you. Always good talking with you.
So if you like this video, click on this one. I think you'll like that too. And subscribe to the channel because there's loads more amazing content coming up. And it's not as windy.